Okay, welcome back. I am talking in these screencasts about project structure, and if you've been watching the previous ones, you will have noticed that the video and the audio have been slightly out of sync. I'm hoping I've fixed it for this one. Fingers crossed. Okay, the previous videos I've been talking about how to name individual files. This is an important skill, and it's one that you do get better at practice with. You get better at with practice, as well as it naming individual files in a way that is useful. It's also really helpful to think about how you're going to organize all the files that make up a project. So typically, when we go and do some kind of project, whether it be a research project, a programming project, a personal hobby or something, it's not usually the case that our project corresponds to a single document, right? You might have documents that are your write-up, so there might be a bunch of Word files or there might be text files, or you might have a bunch of other files that correspond to, if you've written any code, you might have some R scripts. You probably have some images in there as well. Like, you've got a whole lot of different things that need to be organized in some fashion. So the key thing I want to, the thing I'm going to get at just at the beginning is, instead of thinking of your project as a file, like one file, think of it as a folder. Everything in the folder is the project, right? And a project should correspond to exactly one folder. Like, that's the core principle I want you to start thinking about. And then you can think about what goes into that folder, whether the folder needs to have subfolders and all of that kind of stuff. All of that can come later. But start thinking around this idea of all your files are clumped together into projects. And so there are two types of structure I want to talk about. There's the structure of inside a project, how should the files be organized? And then later on, there's a second type of organization I want to talk about, which is, okay, if I've got lots of different projects, where do I put all of these different project folders? Think of these two as separate problems. At the moment, we're going to talk about what is the structure of a single project. Okay, let's get to it. Like before, we've got some principles, and the three principles I want to suggest when thinking about projects, and this is a general set of principles, not just for programming things, is first off, get familiar and comfortable with file paths, which is something that everybody used to know back in the day when computers were unhelpful. Now that computers are trying to be helpful to people, I find more and more often people have grown up with computers and don't quite grasp what file paths are. So I'm going to go and explain all that stuff to you. I'm also going to talk about the concept of a project template, which is a useful way of starting out a project with some structure in place to help you get up and running. And finally, I'm going to proselytize, advocate shamelessly for Readme files. Have Readme files. Things you include as a way of kind of anybody who's coming to your project, whether that be you in a few months' time or somebody new, they know that the first thing to do if they want to make sense of what they're looking at is open the Readme file. When they open the Readme file, that will tell them what they need to be doing. That will tell you what's going on. So Readme files, they are worth their weight in gold, or probably more than that, because the file itself doesn't actually weigh anything because it's on a computer. And I'll stop. Let's actually talk about this stuff. Step one is understanding file paths. So once upon a time, I'd have said that this was basic computer literacy, but it's not anymore. It's actually the kind of thing that is often advanced computer literacy these days. So let's go through and talk about what is now an aging metaphor. So once upon a time, before everything moved online and onto computers, we would have to organize our projects on paper. And so a file would be a few sheets of paper that you might staple together, and then you have a bunch of these files. You'd stick them. You say, well, look, these files actually go together, so just chuck those in a folder. And then you can have a whole bunch of those folders, and you could put them together into a pile. You could stuff a pile in a filing cabinet. You can put multiple filing cabinets in a room, and so on. And it used to be the case that people who started using computers were already familiar with filing systems that were based on papers and folders and cabinets and things like that. And so a lot of the way that computers organize information is based on this metaphor. Unfortunately, I'm old enough that yes, I used to have filing cabinets that were filled with stuff, and I had to I used to know all this stuff. But people look at me like I'm mad when I talk about this stuff nowadays. So we start out with that as the metaphor. But let's flesh this out a little bit more in terms of what that actually means for how your computer organizes files. So often, if you're looking at a computer, if you've opened up Explorer on Windows or Finder on a Mac or whatever it is that you've got on your Linux machine, you'll see something that looks like this, right? So here we have 3 files, which I have obviously given very nice names because I listened to what I said in the previous videos, and I've organized them. I've put them all together in a single folder called project. So like here, let's see if I can find something from my desktop. Here we go. So this is so if I just open up my here's an art project that I'm working on. You don't need to care at all about what you're seeing here, but the point is that this is the same kind of view, right? Here are a bunch of files, here are some folders, and if I go and look, if I open that, you can see there are a whole bunch of files in here. In this case, these are images, like they're all bits of artwork that I've made with R. So here you go, there's some kind of weird potato-y thing. It doesn't matter. The point is that you should probably be familiar with seeing this kind of view, right, for thinking about how files belong to folders. Okay. The way that this then gets represented when we talk about files, and specifically this concept of a file path, is to imagine that you're tracing, you start at the top, and then you take a path through this. So I start at project, and then I go down to the file inside the project, right? So a file path would be project, then file name. So that gives me file paths that are written like this. So if I go project /01, rest of the file name and so on. So you've got folder /file name is a file path. So it tells you how to get from project folder to the document itself. So the slash character here, I always forget which things are forward slashes and which things are backward slashes, but the point is the slash character is what separates out things for different layers or different levels within the file system, right? Although I say that, and on Windows it's exactly the same, except these are forward slash, not a backslash, or whichever way around it is. I always forget what's forward and what's backwards. From what I'm told, increasingly Windows is actually pretty flexible, and Windows can work pretty well no matter which direction you use the slash, but this is so Windows traditionally was different to everything else. So if you look at, say, addresses on the website here, like djnavarro.net/project structure, that slash is telling you that somewhere there's a folder called project structure. Like, it's the same kind of organization. So if on the internet, on Macs, on Ubuntu, it looks like this. On Windows, the slash goes in the other direction. usually. That's the general thing to remember. Okay, so these things here are called file paths, and they're a way of saying that this file here is inside this project. And what that means is that, of course, you can include more things inside other things, right? So we've got our overall project folder. Inside it, there might be a document called overview.txt. That might be something. There's a data folder, and inside that, there's a file called data from X01. So I'm guessing that's experiment 1. There's another file for experiment 02. We've got a separate folder. So we've got a folder for the data. We've got another folder for the analysis, and you can see that each of these 4 analysis files all has a nice name. And we might have a separate folder for the report at the end. So the, like that itself has a thing. So that itself has its own file name, its own file path. So there are in total 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There are 8 files which are organized into 3 subfolders. And those 3 subfolders belong to one project folder. Okay, so the corresponding file paths then, they look like this. So we've got project slash overview, project slash data slash blah. So or project slash analysis slash whatever. The key thing to wrap your head around here is that this is the way that in text that we represent a file path using a piece of text. Like this is one bit of text that tells you how to navigate from project all the way to this file. So this is a kind of slightly less pretty version of that. So here, this is a little bit more graphically user-friendly, but what this is the same information as that. So these things are called file paths. And what you want to be thinking about is, when you design your project, is what kind of visual structure do I want to end up with? What should my project look like when I view it like this? And correspondingly, what set of file paths will I end up with inside my project? So that's kind of most of what I wanted to say about file paths, but I'll break my no programming rule just a tiny bit, just a tiny little bit. This is a tiny little bit of R programming, right? So what I'm doing here is I'm listing all of the files that are in my current project, specifically the project that is these slides. These slides have quite a lot of files because there's lots of little things in there. In fact, in total, there are about 15,000 separate files. So in R, if I was, I could type in this command, list files, recursive equals true. Recursive equals true here means, yeah, go and look inside each of the subfolders and find everything, right? So here are a whole lot of the, there's a file called example template.zip. There's a file inside the image folder called still blah 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 something. These files mostly follow my own rules, not completely. Like, I am not happy in a way with the naming of these image files, but these were the image files I downloaded from Unsplash, which is a site that gives me all of my public domain images I can use for this presentation. And this is how they've organized their files. So they went with so you can see that they've sort of got a slightly different way of doing things. And I didn't want to rename their files, but whatevs. I'll live with it. The key thing is programmatically, right? If I wanted to do in R, if I wanted to search my files and find out, hey, who are the lovely people who are the lovely people and what are the lovely files that I've used to have all of the images in the background? And yay, thank you for these people because they took some lovely photos and made them available for free on the internet so that these slides get to look pretty. So you can sort of see that the ability to do search on the whole file path is kind of useful for quickly finding everything you need, as long as your files have been named in an appropriate way. Okay, so that's everything I wanted to say about file paths and folder structures. Like that, in a sense, is kind of background to make sure that anybody who's thinking about organizing projects has the kind of background that you need to think about how this sort of organization works on a computer. In the next section, I will talk about templating, like actually using now what we've learned from thinking about file paths to think about how to organize our projects. Okay, so I'll stop this one. We'll talk about that in the next